"You think you've won?" he growled, his face inches from hers. "You think you can just burn my life down and walk away with a settlement? You're my wife, Elena. By contract and by law. I own the ground you walk on." Elena didn't flinch. She leaned into him, her breasts pressing against his chest, her heart hammering a frantic, wild rhythm that contradicted her calm expression. "You don't own me, Silas," she whispered, her breath smelling of expensive gin and defiance. "You've spent years treating women like accessories, like toys you can discard when you're bored. But I'm the one toy that's going to break you." The tension between them snapped. It wasn't a slow burn anymore. It was an explosion. Silas's mouth crashed onto hers, not with tenderness, but with a desperate, starved hunger. It was a battle for dominance, a collision of teeth and tongue. Elena groaned into his mouth, her hands flying to his hair, pulling him closer, her nails scratching against his scalp. "Hello, lovelies. I know you're eager to know what happened in this story. Well, I am also eager to show you. But before then, can you kindly like and share this video with someone else? Also, don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. And finally, your subscription will go a long way to encourage me to do better." Now let's dive in. The penthouse of the Blackwood Tower didn't feel like a home. It felt like a high-altitude museum where the air was too expensive to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the jagged, glittering skyline of Manhattan, but inside, the atmosphere was frigid. Silas Blackwood stood before a triptych of mirrors in his dressing room, adjusting a tie that cost more than most people's annual rent. He was a man of cold, predatory precision, a titan of industry who had never met a problem he couldn't buy, break, or bury. At 32, he was the youngest CEO to ever grace the cover of Forbes 3 years running, but his father's dying wish had presented a problem that was currently applying blood-red lipstick in the master suite. Elena Vance. She was the daughter of his father's oldest friend, a woman Silas hadn't seen in a decade until their merger. A marriage contract signed in expensive ink and ancient family obligations. To inherit the multi-billion-dollar Blackwood empire and keep his board of directors from staging a coup, Silas had to remain married to her for 1 full year. His strategy was simple: weaponize neglect. He would be the most public, most scandalous playboy in New York. He would make her life a living hell of tabloid headlines and cold shoulders until she begged for a divorce and fled back to her quiet life in Paris with a modest settlement. Are you planning on staring at your own reflection all night, or does the great Silas Blackwood actually have a schedule to keep? The voice was like silk dragged over gravel. Silas didn't turn. He watched her through the mirror. Elena stepped into the frame, and for a split second, the air left his lungs. She wore a dress that looked like it had been poured onto her, a liquid gold slip that defied gravity and several laws of modesty. Her dark hair was swept up, exposing the elegant line of a neck that looked far too fragile for the weight of the Blackwood diamonds she wore. "I'm meeting some associates at the Velvet Room," Silas said, his voice a flat, clinical baritone. "You aren't invited. Go to sleep, Elena. Or go shopping. Burn through a credit card. Just stay out of my sight." Elena tilted her head, her dark eyes flashing with a spark of something Silas couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't anger. It was amusement. "Associates." She walked toward him, the rhythmic click-clack of her stilettos echoing against the marble. "Is that what we're calling them now? The 3 swimsuit models the tabloids caught you with at the marina yesterday? Or perhaps that aspiring actress you were seen entering the Pierre Hotel with at 2 a.m. while I was at home reading a book on corporate law?" Silas finally turned, his gaze icy. He towered over her, using his height to intimidate, a tactic that worked on seasoned politicians and rival CEOs alike. "I'm a man with appetites, Elena. This marriage is a cage, and I don't intend to sit quietly in it. Don't expect me to be faithful just because we shared a few empty vows in a cathedral. I'm going to be the headline of every gossip rag in this city by morning. If you have any dignity left, you'll pack your bags before the shame hits you." He expected tears. He expected a scream. He expected her to throw a Waterford crystal vase at his head. Instead, Elena stepped closer. She invaded his personal space until the scent of her perfume, jasmine, sandalwood, and something dangerously spicy, filled his senses, clouding his focus. She reached up, not to slap him, but to straighten his tie. Her fingers lingered against his throat, her touch surprisingly warm, sending an unwanted jolt of electricity straight down his spine. "You want to be a playboy, Silas?" she whispered, her lips ghosting against his jawline. "You want the world to think you're an untamable beast who can't keep his pants on for more than an hour?" Silas stiffened, his muscles coiling. "It's not a persona. It's who I am. Ask anyone." "Liar," she breathed, her dark eyes searching his. "You're a man who obsessed with control. You curate your image like a gallery. This Playboy act is just a clumsy, transparent attempt to scare me off. But here's the thing you forgot to research about me, Silas. I don't scare. And I certainly don't play by your rules." She stepped back, a predatory smile playing on her lips. "In fact, I think I'll join you tonight. My heels are too high to waste on a quiet night in." "I told you you aren't. I'm not asking for your permission, husband." Elena grabbed her clutch from the vanity. "If my husband is going to be the talk of the town, I should at least be there to manage the PR. Besides, why should you have all the fun? I have appetites of my own." The club, the Velvet Room, was a den of neon, bass, and excess. It was the kind of place where reputations were made and destroyed over a single bottle of vintage champagne. Silas sat in the center VIP booth, the king of the hill. He was flanked by two blondes he'd hired from a high-end agency, women paid to look adoring and whisper into his ear. He waited for Elena to walk in, to see him in his natural habitat, to feel the sting of public humiliation and finally break. But when the velvet curtains parted, the room didn't look at Silas. The music didn't seem to matter. Elena entered the room like she owned the oxygen. She didn't look toward the VIP booth. She didn't even glance at Silas. Instead, she walked straight to the bar, her gold dress catching every strobe light in the room, making her look like a living flame. Within 5 minutes, she wasn't alone. Julian Vane, Silas's fiercest business rival, and a man who had spent the last decade trying to dismantle Blackwood Industries, was sitting next to her. Silas watched, his jaw tightening, as Julian leaned in close. Too close. Julian's hand rested on the small of Elena's back, his laughter echoing over the heavy bass of the music. The blondes at Silas's side were suddenly invisible. He found himself staring, his vision narrowing until all he could see was Julian's hand on his wife's waist. He watched as Elena took a slow, deliberate sip of Julian's drink, her eyes locked on the rival billionaires, her laughter bright and mocking. She wasn't the victim. She was the main attraction. "Silas, baby, you're spilling your drink," one of the blondes whispered, touching his arm. Silas shoved her hand off. He stood up, his chair screeching against the floor with a violence that made the surrounding tables go quiet. He marched over to the bar, shoving past socialites and models. He grabbed Elena's arm, his grip firm. "We're leaving." "Now," he growled. Elena looked at his hand on her arm, then slowly up at his face. Her expression was one of bored, aristocratic amusement. "Why? I'm just being a playgirl, Silas. Isn't that what we do? Public scandals? Indiscretions?" Julian smirked, leaning back on his stool. "Easy, Blackwood. She's just having a talk with an old friend. Or are you suddenly feeling possessive of the wife you've spent the last month trying to disgrace?" Silas's jaw tightened so hard it ached. He leaned in, his voice a low, vibrating growl intended only for Elena's ears. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elena. You don't know who you're dealing with." She didn't flinch. She leaned in even closer, her chest brushing his arm, her eyes burning with a fire that made his blood boil. Not with anger, but with a sudden, primitive hunger he hadn't felt in years. "I'm not playing your game, Silas," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "I'm playing mine, and I've already won the first round. Look around." Silas glanced over his shoulder. Every phone in the club was out. The flashes were blinding. The headline tomorrow wouldn't be Silas Blackwood seen with models. It would be the new Mrs. Blackwood cozying up to the enemy. She had neutralized his weapon. She had made his scandals look like child's play compared to her own. Elena pulled away, leaving him standing there in the middle of the club, the Playboy king looking like a jilted, jealous schoolboy. She walked toward the exit, but she didn't head for their waiting limo. She hopped into the back of a sleek, silver sports car that Silas didn't recognize, driven by a man whose face was obscured by the shadows of the tinted windows. As the car roared away into the New York night, Silas realized with a sickening jolt that he didn't even know where she was going. For the first time in his life, the CEO of Blackwood Industries was not the one in control. He looked down at his phone. A message flashed on the screen from an unknown number. "Check the news at midnight, darling. I've got a surprise that will make your little hotel trysts look like a Sunday school picnic." Silas looked at his watch. 11:59 p.m. He opened the city's leading gossip site. He expected a photo of her and Julian. He expected a headline about a crumbling marriage. What he saw stopped his heart. It was a high-definition photo taken on a secluded balcony. It showed Elena wrapped in the arms of a man, their lips locked in a passionate, desperate kiss. The man's face was partially hidden, but the caption identified him clearly. It wasn't Julian Vane. The caption read, "Spotted. The new queen of Blackwood Industries in the arms of Silas Blackwood's own chief operating officer. Is the empire falling from within?" Silas felt the world tilt. His COO was the only man who had the keys to his offshore accounts and the blueprints for his next merger. By morning, his stock would plummet, and his board would be calling for his head. Elena hadn't just beaten him at his own game. She had just set his entire world on fire, and she was standing back to watch it burn. This is the turning point where the war moves from the public eye to the private quarters. The air is thick with betrayal and a hunger that neither can hide anymore. The rain lashed against the windows of the Blackwood estate in the Hamptons, a sprawling, Gothic fortress of glass and steel that Silas used when he needed to disappear. Tonight, however, it wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage. Silas stood in the center of the library, the glow of the fireplace casting long, jagged shadows against the thousands of leather-bound books. He held a crystal glass of peat-heavy scotch, but he hadn't tasted a drop. His eyes were fixed on the security monitors. A sleek silver Porsche pulled into the gravel driveway, its headlights cutting through the storm like the eyes of a predator. Elena was home. She didn't sneak in. She didn't look like a woman who had just tanked her husband's stock price by 30 points in a single night. She stepped through the heavy oak doors, shaking the rain from her hair, looking every bit the victor. "The PR team is in a frenzy, Silas," she said, her voice echoing in the hollow hallway as she tossed her keys onto the marble console. "They're calling it the scandal of the century. Your board of directors is currently holding an emergency Zoom call. I believe they're discussing your stability as a leader." Silas didn't move. "My COO, Elena? Marcus has been my right hand for a decade. How much did you pay him to pose for that photo?" Elena walked into the library, her heels clicking a slow, deliberate rhythm on the hardwood. She had changed out of the gold dress into a silk trench coat, belted tight at the waist. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. "I didn't pay him a dime, Silas," she said, stopping just a few feet from him. "Marcus hates you. Most people do. They just fear you more than they hate you. I simply gave him an opportunity to see you crawl. And he took it." Silas set his glass down on the desk with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. In 3 long strides, he was in her space. He was a foot taller, a wall of pure, controlled aggression. He grabbed her by the waist, pulling her flush against him, his hands gripping the silk of her coat. "You think you've won?" he growled, his face inches from hers. "You think you can just burn my life down and walk away with a settlement? You're my wife, Elena. By contract and by law. I own the ground you walk on." Elena didn't flinch. She leaned into him, her breasts pressing against his chest, her heart hammering a frantic, wild rhythm that contradicted her calm expression. "You don't own me, Silas," she whispered, her breath smelling of expensive gin and defiance. "You've spent years treating women like accessories, like toys you can discard when you're bored. But I'm the one toy that's going to break you." The tension between them snapped. It wasn't a slow burn anymore. It was an explosion. Silas's mouth crashed onto hers, not with tenderness, but with a desperate, starved hunger. It was a battle for dominance, a collision of teeth and tongue. Elena groaned into his mouth, her hands flying to his hair, pulling him closer, her nails scratching against his scalp. He tasted like smoke and expensive scotch. She tasted like rain and rebellion. Silas backed her into the mahogany desk, sweeping a stack of legal documents and a bronze bust of some long-dead philosopher onto the floor with a deafening crash. He hoisted her up, her legs immediately wrapping around his waist, her heels digging into his back. "I hate you," he muttered against her throat, his lips trailing fire down the sensitive skin of her neck. "Then show me," she gasped, her head falling back as his hands found the belt of her coat. He ripped the silk open. Underneath, she wore nothing but a black lace corset that pushed her breasts up, straining against the delicate fabric. The sight of her, vulnerable yet commanding, made Silas lose the last shred of his legendary restraint. His hands were everywhere, mapping the curves of her body as if he were trying to memorize her secrets through her skin. He dipped his head, his mouth finding the swell of her breast through the lace, his tongue dampening the fabric until it was translucent. Elena let out a sharp, jagged cry, her fingers clenching the front of his dress shirt, popping the buttons one by one until they scattered across the floor like plastic hail. The fire in the hearth roared, but it was nothing compared to the heat radiating between them. Silas's hands slid down to the tops of her thighs, where black silk stockings were held up by intricate lace garters. He felt the dampness of the rain still on her skin, mixed with the rising heat of her desire. He moved with a feral urgency, his movements rough but precise. He wanted to punish her, to make her regret every headline, every smirk, every moment she had defied him. But he also wanted to worship her. "Tell me you're mine," he demanded, his voice thick and unrecognizable. He moved his hand between them, his fingers finding the center of her heat, discovering that she was already slick and ready for him. Elena arched her back, her eyes fluttering shut as she shattered under his touch. "I'm no one's," she managed to choke out, even as her body betrayed her, clinging to him. "Especially not yours." Silas growled, a low, primal sound from deep in his chest. He unzipped his trousers, the friction of his skin against hers sending white-hot sparks through his brain. He entered her in one swift, powerful motion, burying himself deep within her. They moved together in a chaotic, desperate rhythm, the only sound in the room the heavy thud of the desk against the wall and their synchronized gasps. It wasn't love. It was a war of attrition. Each thrust was a challenge. Each moan was a surrender. Silas watched her face, the way her lips parted, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way she looked at him with a mixture of loathing and absolute, soul-shattering need. He realized then that he had never really seen her until this moment. As the tension built to an unbearable peak, Silas leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You think you're scaring me away, Elena? You're making me want to lock you in this house and never let you see the sun again." Elena's eyes snapped open, blazing with a sudden, terrifying intensity. She reached up, grabbing his face in her hands, her kiss silencing him as they both tumbled over the edge, their cries lost in the sound of the crashing waves outside. An hour later, the room was silent save for the crackling of the dying fire. Silas sat in the leather chair, his shirt open, his chest still heaving. Elena stood by the window, her trench coat pulled tight around her once more, staring out at the storm. The intimacy hadn't solved anything. If anything, it had made the battlefield more dangerous. "What happens now?" Silas asked, his voice rasping. Elena turned, her face a mask of cold professionalism once more. "Now, Silas, we go to the gala. Together. We show the world the happy Blackwoods. We lie to the board. We save your company." Silas frowned. "Why would you help me save it after trying so hard to destroy it?" Elena walked toward the door, stopping only to pick up her fallen keys. She looked back over her shoulder, a small, chilling smile on her lips. "Because, Silas," she said softly, "I don't want to inherit a pile of ashes. I want the whole empire. And I can't take it from you if you've already lost it to someone else." She turned to leave, but stopped. "Oh, and Silas, check your private safe. The one with the biometric lock." Silas stood up, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. He hurried to the painting behind his desk and swung it open. He pressed his thumb to the scanner. The door clicked open. Inside, the velvet-lined box that should have held the Vance diamond, the $50 million stone that was the centerpiece of his family's wealth, was empty. In its place was a small, handwritten note on lavender stationery. Silas picks up the note. It reads, "The diamond is safe, but your father's real will, the one he wrote 3 days before he died, the one that leaves everything to the Vance Foundation and nothing to you, is currently in the hands of my lawyer. Enjoy the gala, darling." It might be your last night as a billionaire. Silas realizes that Elena hasn't just been playing at being a playgirl. She's been an undercover agent for his father's secret legacy the entire time. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was a fortress of flashbulbs and silk. The annual Blackwood Gala was the event of the season, and tonight, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and impending disaster. Silas Blackwood stood at the top of the grand staircase, his face a mask of granite. Beside him, Elena looked ethereal in a gown of midnight blue that shimmered like a bruised sky. To the photographers, they were the picture of a united front, the billionaire and his stunning bride, defying the rumors of scandal. But Silas could feel the weight of the note from his safe, burning a hole in his mind. The real will. His father had always been a man of secrets, but disinheriting his own son? It was the ultimate betrayal. "Smile, Silas," Elena whispered, her hand tucked perfectly into the crook of his arm. "The chairman of the board is watching us from the bar. If he sees you sweating, he'll smell blood in the water." "You're a cold-blooded siren, Elena," Silas muttered through a tight, practiced smile. "You stole the diamond. You have the will. Why are you even here? You could have ended this afternoon." Elena leaned in, as if sharing a romantic secret, her lips brushing his ear. "And miss the look on your face when the rug finally gets pulled out. I told you, I like to play the game to the very end." They moved through the crowd, a lethal dance of pleasantries and lies. Every handshake felt like a transaction. Every toast felt like a funeral. Silas watched Elena navigate the room with a grace that was terrifying. She knew the names of the senators' wives, the favorite vintage of the hedge fund managers, and the dirty secrets of the rivals who wanted Silas gone. By midnight, the gala moved to the rooftop garden, overlooking the dark expanse of Central Park. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and clear. "It's time, Silas," Elena said, leading him to a secluded balcony away from the thrum of the orchestra. Waiting for them was Marcus, the COO who had supposedly betrayed Silas with that staged kiss, and an elderly man in a sharp suit. Silas's father's longtime attorney, Arthur Penhaligon. "Arthur," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "I assume you have something for me?" Arthur sighed, looking between Silas and Elena. "Your father was a complicated man, Silas. He loved his empire, but he feared what it was doing to you. He saw you becoming a man who valued numbers over people, a man who thought everything had a price tag. So he gave it all to the Vance Foundation?" Silas spat. "To her." "Not exactly." Elena stepped forward, pulling a thick envelope from her clutch. "He gave me the power to decide your fate. The will states that if you remained a vapid, unattached playboy for 1 year, the assets would be liquidated. But if you found a partner who could match your intellect and challenge your ego, the empire stays with the Blackwood name." Silas froze. The playboy persona he had adopted to scare her away was the very thing that would have cost him everything. He had been digging his own grave with every staged scandal. "The kiss with Marcus was a test," Elena continued, her eyes fixed on his. "I needed to see if you would react like a CEO protecting an asset or a man protecting his woman. You reacted with fire, Silas. You came after me. You fought for me in that library." Silas looked at Marcus, who nodded sheepishly. "No hard feelings, boss. She's a better strategist than both of us combined." Arthur and Marcus retreated into the shadows of the gala, leaving Silas and Elena alone under the New York stars. The silence between them was heavy, charged with the memory of the afternoon's heat and the realization of how close they both were to the edge. "So," Silas said, stepping closer to her, his shadow swallowing hers, "you've had the winning hand this entire time. You knew about the will. You knew my father's plan. You could have just been a good wife for a year and inherited half. Why go through all this? Why the games? Why the Playboy/Playgirl war?" Elena reached out, her fingers trailing up the lapel of his tuxedo. "Because I didn't want a husband who was just fulfilling a contract, Silas. I don't want a man who sits at the head of a table because his father put him there. I wanted a king who was worthy of a queen. I had to break you to see what you were made of." Silas grabbed her hand, his thumb stroking the skin of her wrist, feeling the rapid pulse there. He wasn't the cold, calculated CEO anymore. He was a man who had finally met his match. "And what did you find?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Elena tilted her chin up, her eyes bright with a mixture of victory and something far more intoxicating. I found a man who is far more interesting when he's losing control. I found a man I actually want to keep. Silas let out a short, dark laugh. You're insane. You realize that, don't you? We're going to spend the rest of our lives trying to outsmart each other. Probably, Elena smiled, and this time it was real. It wasn't for the cameras or the board. It was for him. But think of the mergers we could pull off. Silas pulled her into his arms, his grip possessive and fierce. He didn't care about the will anymore. He didn't care about the board or the stock price. He cared about the woman in his arms who had managed to do what no one else could. She had captured him. I have a new contract in mind, Silas whispered, his lips hovering an inch from hers. One that doesn't have an expiration date. No settlements. No exits. Total surrender on both sides. That sounds expensive, Mr. Blackwood, she teased, her hands sliding around his neck. I can afford it, he replied. He kissed her then, a deep, searing kiss that sealed their new alliance. It wasn't a battle this time. It was a promise. The next morning, the tabloids didn't have a scandal to report. Instead, there was a single, high-definition photo of the couple on the balcony. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at each other, and for the first time in his life, Silas Blackwood looked like a man who had everything he ever wanted. The CEO had tried to play the Playboy, but the Queen had played the long game. And in the end, they both won the crown. Hello, lovelies. Thank you so much for riding along on this story of battle of power, betrayal, and passion. I wanted to create a story where the damsel in distress trope is flipped on its head. In this world, the CEO might have the money, but the wife has the strategy. Did Silas deserve what Elena did to him? Or do you think they are the perfect match? Let me know in the comments who you were rooting for. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. There are many more hot tales coming your way soon. Stay bold, stay romantic.